Good afternoon everybody and welcome back to my channel. My name is Charlene and this is my little YouTube channel all about books, gaming, travel and all things cozy. Today I'm going to be doing a super quick, no spoilers review of Misery by Stephen King. So if you've been living under a rock and you haven't heard about Misery by Stephen King, this is a thriller from Stephen King, obviously. It's 369 pages and I have rated it 4 out of 5 stars. And I have said it already, but this will be a no spoilers review. So if you haven't read this already, don't worry. So I decided to read this because my husband is somewhat of a Stephen King fanatic, and when I was trying to decide what to read next, he couldn't speak highly enough about this. This was one of his favourite recent reads, so he put me onto it too. And he likes it so much so that we have 3 copies. So I obviously read this version because this is just like a fairly cheap paperback that you can just pick up in any bookstore. But he also has this version, which this one came from a local secondhand bookshop. And I'm not sure how true it is, but when he bought this, the guy in there told him that it was a first edition. So don't know, but yeah, he picked this up fairly cheaply from, like I said, a local secondhand store. And then also he has this copy of Misery, which is a first edition. And this, I believe he bought from eBay, but it was a very, very reputable seller and somebody who was potentially moving or something like that. So they were looking to sell a complete collection, and he managed to pick this one up, in amongst all the other books that he was selling. So I'm really, really good that we both like these books because we now have 3 copies. So that's good. So yeah, I'm going to give you a very, very quick spoiler-free review. Blah. So basically, this story follows an author within the book called Paul Sheldon, and Paul writes a series of books following a character called Misery, and the books are all called Misery, Misery's Return, Misery, something to do with misery. So this is the line of books that he's written within the story. Paul is a very, very successful author, and he is just finished writing what he believes is the best book of his life. He absolutely loves it and is glad to move on from the Misery franchise and to write about somebody and something different, until something happens to Paul, which is not good. So Paul is traveling along after he's literally just finished his new book, and he gets into a very serious car accident. And when Paul wakes up, he is not at his house or anywhere he knows, or even at a hospital. So just before I go any further, I thought it's probably a good idea to read you the book blurb. So it says, Paul Sheldon used to write for a living. Now he's writing to stay alive. Misery Chastain is dead. Paul Sheldon has just killed her, with relief, with joy. Misery made him rich. She was the heroine of a string of bestsellers, and now he wants to get on to some real writing. That's when the car accident happens and he wakes up splintered and in pain in the remote mountain house of his rescuer, Annie Wilkes. The good news is that Annie was a nurse and has pain-killing drugs. Bad news is that she has long been Paul's #1 fan, and when she finds out what Paul has done to Misery, she doesn't like it. She doesn't like it at all. And it says one of the greatest thrillers ever written by The Guardian. That is a pretty great review and a pretty great blurb, and a good place to start, but I shall try and shed a little bit more light onto this story. So, like the blurb said, when Paul wakes up from his horrible accident, he finds himself in the house of Annie Wilkes. And this is a very remote house in the rural countryside of America. And all he knows is that he is in pain. This accident was really bad and his legs are completely splintered and broken up. He is unable to walk, unable to move really, and he is in a great deal of pain. So, as the blurb said, when he wakes up, he finds he's under the care of Annie Wilkes, and he soon comes to learn that Annie is his #1 fan, she calls herself, and she is completely obsessed with the Misery line of books. However, Paul has, in his latest Misery book, killed her off. Misery is the main character of his range of books, his line of books, and he has killed off that character, and Annie is not happy about it at all. So you find out At first, Annie seems very kind and patient and willing to look after him, and you know, he finds out that she used to be a nurse, and so he feels completely happy and comfortable in her care. But very, very soon he starts to realize that she is completely unhinged. Her mood swings are all over the place, and basically she can go from being very sweet and kind and loving to being extremely vicious and dangerous. And I think, without giving too much away, I'll just briefly explain the rest of the plot as Paul basically fighting for his life in the care of Annie Wilkes. He is basically kidnapped and locked up in her home, and he is fighting for his life. He's fighting to get better, but also fighting to leave this house. I don't want to go too much more into detail about the plot of the book, because I feel like anything else I say will give things away within the book, and I really hate to do that, because if you haven't read it, I would highly recommend that you do so. Although I scored it a 4 out of 5, I'm kind of wavering on that decision. It's somewhere between a 4 and a 5 out of 5 for me, and I think the reason I landed on 4 out of 5 was just because basically Stephen King did such a good job at making you feel the hysteria and pain and cabin fever of Paul, the writer who was stuck in Annie Wilkes' house. And because of that, when I was reading the book, there were a few times when I thought to myself that I was feeling a bit of cabin fever, or that there were parts of it that kind of spiral into Paul's mental state and what he's thinking, and those parts can be quite long. However, I do feel that those parts were really necessary, because obviously Paul is trapped in this room, and they're really, characters wise, there's only 2 main characters, so without a whole lot of dialogue, Stephen King had to do that to make sure that kind of you were understanding his mental state, Paul's mental state, and you were also kind of like had more understanding about the situation. And obviously without all of that dialogue, then he has to fill the book with something else. So you're reading about everything that's going on in Paul's mind. You're also reading about the book that Paul is writing within the book, the New Misery book. And it's really cool, I think, and a little bit like Inception, to read a book within a book. I think Stephen King does this really well. He always writes about writers and books, and this is, you know, no different to that. It was really interesting, and you also got to find out a little bit about, you know, maybe Stephen King's writing processes in the meantime. But I thought it was really good, really worthwhile reading, but there were points when I wondered whether it could have been shortened down a little bit. So as I said, really there's only 2 main characters in this book, and I've already kind of touched on those characters. There is Paul Sheldon, who is the author who has gotten into a serious accident and is extremely in pain and unwell in the care of Annie Wilkes. And then there's Annie herself. So Annie is a lady who lives alone, and in my head she looks like Miss Trunchbull from Matilda. That's the vibe that she gives me. She's described as kind of like a bit of a loner, a bit unhinged, a bit unkept, untidy, like, yeah, just these things that make you know that she's definitely a bit crazy. And that's exactly what she is. She is a little bit crazy. I can't give you really too much more information about Annie without giving away the plot somewhat, so I'm going to leave it there. But really, there's only those main 2 characters in the book. There are other characters that pop in and out, but just for a very brief period of time. Really, for the most part, it is Paul and Annie. So my review on this book is, like I said, that I'd give it, at the moment I think I'm settling on a 4 out of 5. But it is definitely one of those stories that is going to live in my head. I know that for a fact. I only just finished reading it, and already like I'm kind of thinking about it over and over. It is so well written, as you'd well expect from Stephen King. And whether or not you're a fan of Stephen King books, I would say really do give this a try, because it's like, I think a lot of people think when they hear of a Stephen King book that it's going to be horror, and it's not horror, it's a thriller, and it's just so well written. The characters are so kind of well-rounded, and you can really feel like you know them inside out. I completely understand all the characters, and I just feel like this book, I can completely understand why it was made into a film. I don't think I'm going to watch the film because the film's quite old now, and also I've built up a very clear image in my head of what everything and everyone looks like. But yeah, it's such a great story when you can really see it in your mind. So I would really, really recommend reading it if you haven't already. If you have, please let me know what you think. And also if you've watched the film, let me know what you think, because I'd be really interested to see how close they are. But if you like really intense thriller, if you like that kind of cabin fever, you like to feel super, super involved in the story, then you're going to absolutely love Misery. If you like thrillers, you're going to love Misery. If you like horror books, I think you're going to like Misery. I do think it's a book that a lot of people can enjoy, and it's not very scary neither. So if you don't really like feeling scared in books, don't worry, it's not scary. There's just a few points when it's like really high intensity and high pressure. But yes, that wraps up my very, very quick review. Let me know what you think if you've read it before, and also if you liked Misery, let me know what other books I might like if I enjoyed Misery. Lovely to talk to you today. If you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel, press the like button on this video, and please talk to me in the comments. That'd be lovely. Yeah, and that wraps up for today. Thank you so much. Thank you for watching. Bye.